Well, hey guys, thanks for joining me for this conversation. We're talking about whether Christianity makes sense to people, and I know all of you have wrestled with that question over the years, as have I. But just to get right into it, you know as well as I do that in the world, in the country, we go through tragedies and there's crises just across, what's happening in the world. And one of the things that stood out to me just recently, as we experienced kind of the Southern California fires, was recognizing how often people, maybe people who even aren't typically turning to faith, people who turn to faith even in the midst of crisis and tragedies when maybe that's not what they're used to doing. This is just a quote from John Mayer. John Mayer, the singer.
Thanks for clarifying.
Guitar player too. Yeah.
John Mayer said this.
Multi-talented.
Yes, multi-talented guy. But he said this, interesting. He said, "I'm not a praying person, but I'm praying tonight." And I just wonder, for people who aren't Christians, he's even admitting, I'm not a praying person. Maybe he's saying, I don't even have faith. But what is it in us that draws these things out in people, specifically in the middle of tough times? Julie, I'm going to put you on the spot. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it really comes to like desperation of the world around them not making sense, or being able to reconcile whether it is the tragedy of the fires or the brokenness that they're seeing. And so it's beyond what they can reconcile in their own mind or experience. And so there's this innateness, I think, and I've felt that myself in my own journey, that draws them to look outside of themselves to deal with that.
Yeah. What would you guys say?
Big time.
What would you say, John?
Yeah, I agree with Julie. I mean, I think of it as like an existential crisis, right? It's like, I see it sometimes, especially when you see it more maybe in that pop culture thing, where all of a sudden you see people being praying for you, and you're like, I don't think you've ever prayed in your life. And I'm pretty sure you're not actually going to pray. I think John Mayer was just trying to set up a new song. So
Totally.
That's what I think
Yes,
he's probably doing
yeah, right,
marketing.
yeah.
But I do think there's a point of which, like, when people realize they're not in control. I do think that is what is maybe at core of so many of those crises for people, where also they're like, wait, but I had this plan for my life. If I did this, and this is how it's supposed to work. Now it doesn't. So like a big tragedy does that for people, right? Also, it's like, wait, I actually can't control and protect my home, from this fire. And I do think that almost like necessitates or creates this feeling, this crisis of like, wait, is there something beyond this?
Yeah.
I hope there is. And then I think that's what maybe opens up their mind just briefly for a moment. Like, I don't think maybe John Mayer will become a man of faith going forward, but I think they have these little glimpses of like, ooh, maybe there is something. And I don't know if I know it's true or not, but at this moment, I'm willing to go for it.
Yeah.
And to kind of relinquish a little bit of control, because actually I don't have it.
Yeah.
I think is sometimes what happens.
Yeah, Daniel, maybe even beyond the why, does that give evidence to the fact that there is a creator? I mean, what is it in human beings that turns to a higher power in these moments? Is there some proof of existence in there, or is it just like, no, it's wishful thinking?
I think it definitely points to something. It makes me think of the phrase, there's no atheists in foxholes. Mm-hmm. And that's this idea that when confronted with something so beyond our control, there is this thing that seems innately hardwired in human beings to grasp for something beyond us, something beyond the materialistic worldview, and just look for something more. It makes me even think of a crucial part of every 12-step program is acknowledging that there is a higher power. And I do think it actually could be a moment when John Mayer leans into his faith and becomes a person of faith. We don't know for sure, but it does create this opening where things that we suppress and distract ourselves from in our everyday life, it's like an opportunity for that existential, deeper question of reality to break in and illuminate. There's a reason we grasp for that, because there truly is something beyond us.
Yeah, that's really good. Nate, how about you?
Yeah, I think one of the things that you mentioned is like those moments are opportunities, and whether it's the fires, whether it's a death in the family, whether it's someone with sickness, there are moments in our life as humans that this agnostic, I don't know if there's a God, who knows, maybe it's just this, you almost have to like cash that check of belief of like, what do you do in those moments? What do you do when you're standing there looking at the casket? And if this is just it, there's a hopelessness to that. And so I think in those moments, we do turn to something and go, wait, maybe there is more. And even if I don't know what that is, in this moment, I can't deal with the hopelessness of this being it. And I do think there are times where it's like that agnostic, who knows, we can get through maybe weeks at a time, months at a time, maybe years of your life with that belief. But then there are moments that we do have to kind of cash that check of belief. And I think that's when it creates like this dissonance.
Yeah, that's really good. Well, just to personalize this, because you all have moments in your life where you had to wrestle intellectually, from a heart perspective, a life perspective, whether Christianity makes sense to you. You're all highly intelligent people. You all serve the church, and I'm pretty sure you're all Christians, although we can go through that one by one if we need to.
We'll find
Let's
out
all-
after the question. Here we
You
go.
are, and so but I know, you've been chosen for this panel because you have wrestled through the bigger questions. So let's personalize this, take it back as far as you need to go, okay? When did Christianity make sense to you? And we'll start this time work our way back down the other way. Nate, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I grew up in the church, started attending church like from a super young age. I think my mom probably had me in nursery at like 3 weeks. So Christianity was always something that had made sense to me. I never grew up with it not making sense. I kind of thought that's what the way the world worked. I would say the first time I had to kind of make my own decision was when I was 12 and my grandpa had passed away. And that was kind of the first time that this reality of eternal things kind of really set in for me. And I would say that's when I made my decision to actually give my life to Christ. But I would say since then has really been a journey over the last nearly 20 years of kind of wrestling through, like, even though I've had this belief, does it still make sense? And I think most of the doubt that I've had has come from a place of faith, where I had this core belief that I thought was true, and I test it against the things that I see in the world. Because there are times that I've gone through things or seasons where I go, how does this make sense? There is things in Scripture, there is things in the world that it's like, how can this be true? And I think most of those doubts have come from that place versus, I know many other people who've had stories of maybe never having belief and then wrestling with it and coming to that fact. I kind of came from a different approach.
Yeah, for sure. Daniel, how about you?
Yeah, my story is similar in some ways to Nate's, that I grew up in the church. I grew up with Christian parents. And for me, it was really a personal tragedy that put me in a place of questioning everything that I grew up believing. And there's a book called The Journey. I can't remember who wrote it, but one of the things they talk about is the wall. This reality that every believer is going to come to a point when you hit something that is like crashing into a brick wall with your faith. And there's just a framework of spiritual formation that I relate to a lot in what's like how Christianity once made sense to me when I was younger, what I went through when I hit the wall,
Well, what
and
age
how
were you when that wall happened?
it was right around my senior year of high school.
Okay.
Yeah, so the wall for me was my mom passed away from cancer, and just really threw me into a whirlwind of wondering, is everything that I grew up believing about God, God's goodness, God's sovereignty, God's ability and willingness to do miracles, like I just started questioning everything. I actually remember a moment where I just by myself told myself, like, start over now and start considering every world religion, every belief system, and I started to try to logically work through it all. And so the framework that I connect with on how we navigate this is order, disorder, and reorder. That, like, a lot of what we believe when we're younger, it makes sense because we don't think critically. We're in this pre-critical season of our life, and then we hit something where it actually doesn't make sense anymore the way we used to believe it. And those of us who come through that on the other side and maintain our belief and Christianity making sense in a deeper way, because we somehow figure out this reorder process.
Yeah.
So that's how Christianity has made sense, then kind of didn't for me,
Yep.
and then does at a deeper
How
level.
long was that time of disorder. You know what I mean? Like when you hit that wall your senior year when you lost your mom, like how long would you say you kind of sat in that, like, I wonder if Hinduism is for me? I mean, whatever journey you went through with the religions, I'm so curious, like, how long would you say maybe that felt like you were kind of in that middle?
Yeah, it's interesting because I would say
Maybe it's still happening. I don't know.
the first question I asked myself is like, do I even believe in God anymore?
Yeah.
And that question didn't last long at all because I just could not wrap my head around this all being an accident. And like, to me, one of the most confounding thoughts is that somehow everything came from nothing and nothing was the reason.
Right.
You know what I mean? Yeah. So I was just like, pretty quickly, I'm like, no, that's not an option for me. But then the process of finding Jesus in belief, that like I actually feel like I worked my way to Jesus through the other faith systems pretty quickly because I found his teaching so compelling. But it was once again like living in a relationship with him that took years to get back to.
Yeah, that's really good. That's the question I was thinking of too, John. It's interesting how both your stories did center around tragedy or an experience of loss and wondering what's beyond. And so, just even in light of that first question, it's unique to you guys. But John, let's talk about you.
Let's talk about
Let's
me.
talk about you.
Finally. Jeez. I mean, anytime someone asks me that question, I'm like, it still doesn't.
Yeah,
You know,
totally.
It's like,
well, say more about that.
Yeah.
Keep
I share this often with people, but like, I do not have the gift of faith. So, or belief. So when people talk about, I have the gift of faith, I'm like, good for you. Like, I have the gift of, I don't know, not faith, just disbelief, or, whatever, however you want to, anti-faith. No, I'm not anti-faith.
Whoa, slow down.
This has been a good
We'll
last
edit
day.
that out.
This has been a good last day.
Yeah.
But honestly, it's always been a struggle. I mean, as long as I can remember. So, I mean, similar to you guys, I was raised in a home, where the language of Jesus was part of the home, being a part of church, being, learning the stories of faith were just a part of my life. And yet, even from a young age, I remember always wondering, is this really true? Like, I don't know. Could it be 1,000 other ways? Like, is this really the way it is? And so any sort of faith steps, any sort of faith decisions have just been a struggle. And I'm 46, and I would say it's been 46 years because I was what was the term you used?
Pre-critical.
Pre-critical. Man, that's so good.
Daniel's
I've
very smart.
I've learned so much today already. But for as long as I can remember, I've been in this kind of been this. So faith for me, what I realized was for so long, what I've been building was what I would call like a house of cards faith.
Yeah.
Right. So like I was building a faith, but it was all these truth claims. So every card was a truth claim. You have to believe this about creation. Believe this about this story of the Bible. Believe this about this thing. Believe this about this thing. And then when I got to college and those truth claims started to be questioned, it was like the whole thing fell apart for me. So like that was my crisis moment. And so it wasn't necessarily an external event that happened. It was just this kind of like, wait, but I don't think that's true anymore. Well, if that's not true, then none of it's true. And that's where I got, and then so I had to rebuild, sort of a living, breathing, relational faith.
Yep.
And sometimes the way I describe it's like, I love the Lord my God with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength. I just had a big mind and a tiny heart.
Yeah.
And so I had to get to a point to actually see and experience, taste and see that the Lord is good. And that took it forever. It feels like, I mean, it took a really long time, decades, I would say, of wrestling. But I think for me, that's when it started to make sense. When I could actually accept that there's certain things that I actually can't know. So it's not that I just don't know them. It's like I just actually can't know that, and so actually embracing the mystery of faith and the unknowability of God actually helped me, I think, know him for the first time, if that makes sense. And so now it's been more of a relational focus. And so that really was the game changer for me, was to stop seeing it as, I better assent to all these mental or all these truth claims and actually get to know who Jesus is and then invite him to be a part of my life and actually have a relationship with him and not just this kind of, I know these things about him. That was the turning point for my faith. And so that's when it became a living, breathing dynamic versus a static affirmation of truth, if that makes sense.
So many people can resonate with what you're saying. Thank you for sharing that. I think so many people can identify because they look at pastors or people in the church like they're just so certain. They're 100%. They don't have these questions. And what you're basically saying is, no, I'm just I'm wrestling through this even
All the
now.
time.
You said it's taken decades, but you're still
Yeah.
in process. You're going to be in
Absolutely.
process for the rest of your time,
Yeah,
your life.
absolutely.
And-
Yeah, the things I'm certain of are very small.
yeah.
The
right.
things I'm uncertain of are very big.
Yeah.
And I actually
And yet-
think that's really helped me have a living, breathing,
Yes.
vibrant faith where I'm so
Yes.
grateful for my relationship with Jesus.
Yeah.
You know, in a way that I never was before. So
Great. Okay, Julie, let's hear from you. When
Yeah.
did Christianity make sense to you?
So similar in that I grew up in a Christian home and went to church, learned the Bible stories. Really, I would say built the foundation of knowledge about knowing who Jesus was. But it was that relational aspect. And I did have a season in life where I was early 20s. And I would say, if you've heard that phrase, if there's a will, there's a way. I was that person. And I made my will.
Yeah.
And if there was a desire, I'd go after it. And around 22 years old, found myself looking in the mirror one morning, and I was like, 1, who am I? 2, how did I get here? And 3, like, this can't be it. And a really significant relationship was crumbling. Other areas of life were not thriving, and that's actually when I took my knowledge-based faith of what I had grown up knowing and a foundation that was built, and actually came to Eagle Brook. And so through coming to Eagle Brook, which I will acknowledge was scary, because when you feel like you've made a mess of yourself, coming into a space of what you imagine of how you'll be received was very intimidating. And yet it was through my first experience where I walked in the door, someone said hello to me, my guard went down just a little bit. Went into worship. I will tell you, very different experience than what I grew up with. Girl probably scared the person next to me through weeping because I was so emotional. But it was in that encounter that I truly had, like we talked about in previous conversations, but of just this overwhelming like moment of significance where I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew I wanted to understand and know more. And I wish I could tell you guys that it was like that day everything changed. But it was this like new process of, well, what does it mean to unpack what I've known about what faith means, who Jesus is, and actually like acknowledge that he wants a personal entering into my mess as I am space of what faith looked like. And the word that I would put to my experience, which has continued and is still continuing, is patience. I am not a person of patience in my nature, and yet God has been so patient with me in my journey of taking the knowledge, which is so important to know God's word, and also like that relationship and that nearness that I think is what really transformed my faith in my journey.
That's really good, Julie.
that's so good.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a thing too where it's like I don't know, like as you guys are sharing, it just reminds me of like sometimes I think we have to pretend like a certain thing to experience God or something. You know what I mean? And it's like, so you have this moment when you come to church where all of a sudden you're like, you're at your wit's end. And so you're not pretending anymore.
No, you
and that's actually when you experienced something powerful. And it's like when you kind of have to like deal with the fact that like, I'm not even sure God's good because my mom just passed away. Like you can't like pretend behind your theology anymore. You actually have to like lean in to be like, is this a bunch of bunk or is it true? Like, I don't know. There's just something I've been wrestling with that. Of like, sometimes I think we hope God meets us in our pretend self, and God the whole time is like, I'm just waiting to meet you over here in your real self. Would you please be real with me? And I don't know.
We think we need to bring our masked self,
Yeah.
and God wants us to unmask,
Yeah.
and He's just waiting patiently
Yeah.
for us to do that.
What you're talking about brings up a phrase that I've actually become fond of using with people, which is that God can't have a relationship with who you pretend to be,
Yeah. Yep.
because that person doesn't actually exist.
Yeah. Let it go.
And I think so much of that's what tragedy, pain, crisis can do, is take away the pretend, the mask that we've put on for the world, where we actually get to relate honestly to God.
Yeah.
And I think that's necessary.
Why do you think, just continuing with this conversation, because I think one of the things that keeps people from turning to God, turning to the church, is just what you said, a fear of how they're going to be received. So we are saying, man, God really meets you when you are purely honest. God can't have you can't have a relation with God, or God can't have a relation with a fake person. What'd you say? It was brilliant. I just can't totally remember, but it was great.
Let's go with that. You can't be fake person God. He's real person God.
What you said.
It was great. I just didn't write it down, but next time let's talk about it. No, but I think what keeps people from Christianity is maybe this assumption that, well, they've got it all together. They can't possibly receive my mess. Like, what in the world is, why is that? Why do people feel that? And let's also unpack maybe some of the other reasons that people have a negative perception of Christianity and the church. But just starting with that question, John, why do you think, and this is a topic you and I talk a lot about because you're really passionate about it, but why beyond even just the like, well, I can't really be who I am, maybe talk about that a little bit, and then why else do people have a negative perception of Christianity?
Oh, man. That's a big one.
Yeah.
That's the deep end of the pool, John.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, we're going there.
I mean, I think the first part of the question is, none of us wake up in the morning and we're like, I'm going to be vulnerable today.
Yeah.
Right. So that's not a uniquely Christian challenge. Like, I think if anyone's honest, they would say in almost every environment they're in, they're putting their guard up. Right. We wake up in the morning and put our guard up, which is what we do as humans. And so I think the church in general for people's mindset isn't a place that's a safe place not to do that. Right. So if anything, it just does accentuate what already is human nature, which is protectionism and guarding. And so I think sometimes the church gets a bad rap, maybe unjustifiably, that it does that. But it's like every place does that. I don't go to McDonald's, and I go to McDonald's a lot. I don't share, I don't like share, I hide actually with other people that I go to McDonald's. So I mean, all of our environments we do that. But I do think if we're honest, we have to be honest as the church that we have for sure contributed to that. And I think part of it is even the church system I was raised in, because it was this sense of like, wait, you don't believe that? Like, so if you have a question or a doubt, like that's a crisis, right? In that church culture that I was a part of growing up. If you do this thing or do that thing, I heard that person swear once, all these like moralisms that we've created, right, over time, kind of based on our tradition, for sure has contributed even more to that feeling of, I don't even know if they'll accept me if I walk through those doors, Again, I think we shouldn't be surprised that people have that feeling. And I think we are culpable, if we're honest, in creating that dynamic, right, in the world. And that now has become then the dominant definition of church, right? If you look at pop culture's kind of expression of what church is in movies, anywhere else, it is that, right? It is super, super judgmental people who are really concerned whether you smoke or drink and like need you just to like look and behave a certain way. And we miss the splendor of God's kingdom, which is all sorts of types of people that are exploring faith at different levels. And so that truly come as you are, that Jesus was so good at, right? Like he was so brilliant at that. Just come as you are, gets lost in the mix of all of that. And so like that is probably one of the things that makes me most sad, right? Like I just was talking to a tender yesterday. We had a meeting. She's going through a little bit of crisis of life. She's dealing with pain from 24 years ago. And she's been coming to church now for about a year. But her question was still like, what do I need to do to like earn God's forgiveness? Literally what she asked, like, what do I need to do to earn God's forgiveness? And I'm like, you don't have to, but she's carrying, even after coming to church for a year and loving it, she's still carrying this weight of what do I need to do to like get God on my side? And I love the fact that we get to be a church that says he's on your side. Yeah. Like you don't need to do anything. Yeah. But I think people are just carrying that everywhere they go, especially with issues of faith. Of like they got to earn it. 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 And it's really tough to get past that, I think.
Hey, Nate, what in your role, you and I are often evaluating everything that's said, sung, spoken, whatever on the weekend experience because we are so passionate about not turning people away and getting in the way of faith for people. We're just so, you and I collectively are so passionate about making sure that nothing stands in the way of them and Jesus. But there are still things that stand in the way. So continuing on this negative perceptions, what are some of those things that you think are the reason that people don't turn to God, turn to the church, and what are some of the ways that we can help fix that?
Yeah, well, one of the things I think that happens in just every culture is pride. It's just a human thing. And whether it's church, whether it's coffee, whether it's gym, whether it's music, as you're in a culture for long enough, you start to develop this pride, this arrogance, this ego about looking down on where you once were. And so then newcomers who come in, you look down on it. You go to some coffee shop and it's like these baristas who are like, oh, you like drip. Oh, we only do these level of pour over. Or the more you go to a gym and you've been going to that gym for 10 years now and you're doing bench press like that. Oh, that's not. And there is this, like, you just get arrogant. You just feel like you've moved past, you've arrived at another level and you no longer are what once was. And I think a lot of churches really fall prey to this. And it's very easy to look and forget the experience that you had when you first came into church. And so whether it be worship culture, whether it be messages, we go, oh, we don't need that anymore. We're going to teach theology 101 or 201 or 301. Oh, we're not going to do those type of worship songs. We're not going to do those type of music because we're going to do this. The thing that would speak to me at my, new level that I'm at. And I think we forget, oh no, we once were there, and continue to do those type of experiences. And so I think we just need to continually humble ourselves and remember when we were new, and remember that those people are always walking through our doors.
Yep, that's really good. There's a, I don't know if it's newly popular. I'm not really up with the trends. Okay, I'll just be honest. So I don't know what's trendy or not.
This is
what
the
I'm trying
least
to say.
surprising to watch.
This is a confession. I'm being
Water is
vulnerable.
wet.
I really don't know what's trendy or not. But I know at least a couple of years ago, and maybe it's still the case, that people deconstructing their faith, this word deconstruction was talked about all over social media, and a lot of well-known Christians were, I'd been a Christian for a long time, but now I'm not. I'm deconstructing my faith. Ironically, it seems like what's happening is people are turning back to faith, but maybe we'll get there. But a lot of people do, and you all have stories where you look in the mirror and you say, do I really believe this? I mean, at the end of the day, that's deconstruction. You're just breaking it down. I was taught all these stories, House of Cards faith, whatever that is. So I'm going to start with you, Daniel, but what is deconstruction? And then if someone is going through a process of questioning, doubting, even maybe they're using the word, maybe they're not deconstructing, what would you say to them? Because again, you have this story, and John was asking, how long did it take? Was it a day? Was it years? Was it, what kind of question you ask? What is deconstruction? How can someone go through the wall of faith in a healthy way?
Yeah. I think my first question is, how nerdy do you want me to be right now?
I would say get pretty
Be
nerdy.
really-
I think
Okay.
I think
Be the
10 out
real
of 10
Daniel.
nerd.
You already look like
10 out of
a
10
nerd.
nerd
It's
facts.
fine.
Okay, well, I'll
I
just
want to
be
hear
how I
Blaise
look.
Pascal. I want to hear some quotes.
Be yourself.
Nietzsche. I want to
Okay,
hear it all.
well, how about some Jacques Derrida?
Oh, that's
where we're
good.
going to
Yeah.
go.
Okay. Pseudo-Dionysus.
So,
We'll get you, Gandalf.
did you just speak Elvish? Okay, so I think a simple definition of deconstruction is simply pulling something apart piece by piece. That's what deconstruction means. So if you think of, like, I'm going to remodel my house.
Yep.
Well, first I got to tear some stuff down.
Yep.
Or if I'm going to completely demolish a building and it's just going to be an open lot, that's also tearing it down. And I think for me, one of the helpful distinctions I came to in my life is there is a healthy deconstruction, but there's an unhealthy demolition, and they're not the same. And really, the difference between deconstruction and demolition, the way that I understand them, is deconstruction is for the purpose of getting down to the most true, useful, beneficial parts of a thing for reconstruction. Whereas demolition is just like tear it all down. And I think what happened, and I actually think our culture is starting to pull out of this, was not deconstruction for the purpose of reconstruction. It was actually what I would call deconstructionism, where like deconstructionism became its own worldview.
Yeah.
It became its own belief system that literally philosopher Jacques Derrida kind of pioneered this thing. And it's interesting, he even distanced himself from the word deconstruction eventually. And it just became almost this way and mode of living where like question everything and everything is wrong and there is no truth. And so there's also this idea of like anti-structuralism, that any structure that exists needs to be torn down. And I actually think right now we're in the middle of seeing that pendulum start to swing the other way. It's fascinating some research came out that Bible sales have skyrocketed recently. I'm not sure if you guys are aware of this,
Yeah.
but year over year, Bible sales are up like 22% or something. And I think there's a lot of people with a lot of cultural influence who are seriously considering Christianity. I mean, some of the most famous atheists in the world, Richard Dawkins being one of them, started recently describing himself as a cultural Christian because he said, I want to live in a society that's based on Christian principles, even though I reject the truth claims of the belief. So like, yeah, I think deconstruction can be really good. But for a while there, it became the end goal itself. It was almost like popular and trendy to be deconstructing.
Yeah, it wasn't built on like, oh, I'm deconstructing to believe.
Yes.
It was deconstructing to prove why I shouldn't believe.
Yep.
Right? And it's like when you take any sort of genuine desire to even identify, is there belief here, then it does. It just becomes its own belief system, right? That just, your demolition. I love that picture. Demolition versus deconstruction. That's helpful.
I also think one of the things that's between deconstruction and demolition is like, what was the structure that was built and how was that structure built? And I think we, as like the generation we grew up in, there is just a reality of the way that either our parents or pastors at the time were talking about and building up kids' faith, that was this house of cards type faith that like, you have to take this whole thing to be true or else none of it. And so then people start pulling at the house of cards or unraveling one thing, and then all of a sudden you just throw out everything. And it's like, well, if I can't believe all of this, then I believe none of this. And I think that's where we as a society are seeing like, oh, that pendulum shift isn't good.
Right.
You can't just throw out everything. And so I think we as kind of the generation that we're in now, we have to look at the younger generation and go, how are we building up a faith that is robust enough that parts and pieces can be talked about, and it doesn't mean that the whole structure has to collapse. And so that's where, to get personal, like we're raising a child, he's almost a year now, and trying to think through how are we setting up patterns of future faith that isn't just, well, I believe this whole thing because my parents believed it's true, and then one day finding out something that goes, well, now I can't believe any of it. How do we properly like raise them up in ways that it's like things that it's a robust faith. It's built out of actual building blocks of construction that you could take out a piece and there's still all of this left.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I don't have the answer for that, but it's just clear as a society that like there was a generation that failed at that.
Right.
I just want to say, I'm so glad that he is putting me in his generation.
Yes.
I've never
You guys
felt.
are, you guys are the same age.
I was like, he could be my son.
Yeah.
And yet we're in it. We're in it
this
together.
is your son.
Together.
The 1-year-old's your
Yeah,
grandkid.
that's what it feels like. This is the
generation.
best
It was a wide
video
paintbrush.
experience of my life.
Wide-
I feel
wide
so
brush.
great about
I
that.
actually don't know how different you are in age. I think
Well,
I am starting to group them all together. Nate's an old soul,
Yes.
That's great. That's great.
and
But
you're a young soul.
I would think, yeah, sure. No, that it is so true
Yeah.
though. I mean, I think that piece to me, I think part of what leads to like a deconstruction crisis for people is because we don't have guides for them to go through that process. So it feels like a crisis to them. Like if I was to describe my kind of, because I don't think I was in a demolition mode, but I do think it felt like a crisis to me because I didn't have a guide to go along with me. Because so I felt like, oh my gosh, I'm crushing this thing. It's all, it all came crashing down, but I didn't have someone along with me to be like, that's okay.
Yeah.
Like let's talk about that thing and let's start to build, a different type of foundation that's not a house of cards foundation. And I missed that. Like I didn't have that kind of guide with me, which is why I think it took so long to kind of establish that. And so for me, I think of it more as like, I just want to have a trellis of faith, right? That's growing. And there's little handholds and footholds as I grow up this trellis, but it's not, it's not fragile, because it's able to move and adjust as I learn and as I grow and as I experience God. Like it doesn't need to feel so static and so controlled. And so, my oldest is 16, so we're in a different generation. But that's for sure what we talk about, my wife and I, and the times where she questions things. Like my gut reaction is like, she's not going to heaven.
Yeah.
Like we need to get this right. So I am drawn to a house of cards faith development out of fear. And so to actually, even as a parent, to try to have the grace to kind of go, all right, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
And that's a tough thing to wrestle with. And how are you going to wrestle through that? And
That
almost giving her tools of how to wrestle versus knowledge of like how to just close her brain off.
Yeah.
Right.
You know what I mean? But actually give her tools to wrestle through faith.
And what you guys are saying really brings to mind an idea I read about recently that I'm still working through, which is, could it be helpful actually to differentiate between faith and belief?
Yeah.
that faith is actually primarily relational. It's trust-based, whereas faith is primarily intellectual. It's like assent-based.
Belief.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Faith is relational.
Yeah.
Belief is intellectual.
Yep.
And that a lot of what happens is people let go of faith because certain beliefs, certain things that I intellectually assented to are now called into question, so I disengage from the relationship. Whereas like what I actually see in the book of Job is maybe our best example of this, is Job never disengages with God relationally. He maintains his faith that way, even while he's questioning at the deepest level his beliefs. And I think that could be the framework. That could be the structure that allows people to go through storms of life and not have their faith shipwrecked in the storm.
That's really good.
Yeah, and one of the ways that I think about faith, I don't know if this is helpful, but it's like faith is a practice of the belief. And so, taking it outside of like the Christian walk for a second and thinking through like exercise. If you're trying to get healthy, you start lifting weights, you start running, you start eating healthy, and you might not see any active changes, but you have a belief that if I do these things over time, I will build up muscle, I will lose weight, I will do this. And the faith is, I'm going to go to the gym every day. I'm going to put this into practice, this belief that I have. And then over time, when you do that and you start to see these physical transformations and these things changing, all of a sudden now that belief has like, I have actual conviction in these beliefs now because I had that faith to put it into practice. But if you just have that belief and you never have the faith to put it into practice, you can't grow in the conviction of those beliefs. And so I feel like we have these beliefs, but like faith is actually taking it off the shelf and going like, I'm going to live this out. I'm going to practice those beliefs.
But how much do you bench press?
That's the real question.
Okay, now next
Every
question.
time he does a gym
Like, that's
membership,
the real
I just
question.
sit here feeling bad.
Yeah,
Gym
I
reference.
was like, oh, I should. He's right. If I do want to get healthy,
You
I
used
should do those
to
things.
be at a gym.
I used to. Yep.
Good job.
It's been a while, years.
I remember talking about that one day.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah.
That helps too, John. Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to turn this question to Julie because so much of what we talked about is building a faith specifically for the next generation that is not a house of cards, that allows for doubt and question and deconstruction, but not demolition. And you oversee our ministry for all of our birth, which, by the way, I wonder if Nate's
You gotta finish that. You
birth
can't
in
say-
fifth grade. I
You
just
don't
birth.
say birth.
Where are we going?
Birth in fifth grade.
She's the midwife. for
Birth in
Eagle
fifth
Brook,
grade.
So if you have
You're not the midwife.
needs-
That's not true. You're
a lot
not
of
the
time in
midwife.
hospitals.
Don't listen to John. Birth through fifth grade. And I was going to say, is Nate's 1-year-old reading the Bible yet? We'll see.
We did go
questionable.
through baby dedication. We did go through
Okay,
child
good.
dedication.
Perfect. But Julie, as someone who oversees really helping build the foundation, and by the way, I tell you this privately, I'll tell you publicly, you're so good at what you do. I mean, everyone in our church is so grateful for you as a parent, as a pastor. So thank you for all that you do for, I mean, tens of thousands of kids, literally. You're helping build this faith. I know you take it very seriously. So what are some of those things you are thinking about for kids and how specifically in the church? So take it from like, the theology, yep, there's some of that there. But why does the church matter so much to the next generation? Like what kind of experiences are you trying to create for them to help them realize like, yeah, the church and faith is a big part of my foundation and growing up?
Absolutely. Faith is something we take very seriously in a kids ministry experience at our church, and we want to think through the lens of kids, meeting them where they're at in a way that's relevant for them. Something that we are very intentional with is the language. Is it appropriate for them to be able to understand, engage with? You can take it to Nate's little one and think of even just planting seeds of what healthy, safe relationships look like when they're engaging with the volunteers in the spaces. I would say one of the things we've been talking a lot about, though, is actually when we think about faith formation and taking it from the intellectual and the knowledge-based learning, which is, of course, important, but where are those spaces that we intentionally allow kids to ask questions and for them to hear us as adults say, we don't know, but let's actually go and look for that together, so that we invite them into something that might even feel not natural to us to do, but that will ignite their faith in a whole nother way of significance. And so, we think about everything from the conversations and the spaces we're curating to the colors on the wall. I would say it's also, we recognize that as a church, we are one part of a child's faith formation, but it really is a partnership with the families. And so even thinking through the lens of what does family discipleship look like? And how do we resource the parents? How do we create spaces for those parents to ask those questions? Help them have safety to say, I don't know where to start, what to do, and meeting them in where their needs are at.
Yeah, that's really good. So just continuing with the church, because part of the reason I even asked you that question is our kids love going to church. I mean, they love it. That's part of the thing that just brings me so much joy, because I love the church. I love Jesus. I also love the church. Some people love Jesus. They don't love the church. So let's talk about that for a second, you guys, and gal. Not the midwife, but the gal.
It's great.
Bertha. Let's talk about the church, because I think some people, you and I, we all know this, that there are some people like, I've got faith. I believe in God. I might even believe in Jesus, but the church is so irrelevant and stupid and oppressive, and just go on in the words.
Yep.
Does the church matter still? And why does it matter?
I think I am actually really curious, Julie, to hear more of your story around this. Specifically, the moment you decided to go back to church, even though it felt scary. And what was it about the church that helped you find that relational aspect to your faith that was missing before?
Yeah, when I think about that question, for me, I think it's two parts. It's one, when the church reflects its the way it's supposed to be, like God's plan for the church. That is where we can enter in, bringing our full selves, our unmasked selves. So I'll kind of go back to that. But then the other piece is what people see and why they don't want to be a part of it is because that's not always reflected in the external image of the capital C church. And so for me, I would say when I experienced my personal church experience at Eagle Brook, which was different than my experience growing up, what I did experience was that I felt welcome where I was. I felt welcome. I shared to bring my mess, to bring my questions, to bring the even saying I'm not enough, I'm not worthy, what does this mean? And there was people there that I felt like, even just being in the worship experience, being surrounded by a room full of people who maybe had the faith that I did not yet have. And you can't recreate that. That was natural, organic, authentic, faith-filled moment. And so I think when you can have the body of Christ in one space as the church is not the building. I didn't go to the church for the building. I went there for hope and for connection, for community. And then what I didn't know that I was going to get, which was the best part, was the relationship with Jesus. And so that's where I say the church matters. And as a mom of two, there is nothing better than walking into my kid's bedroom. And I can tell you, it is not me. It is the volunteers who are leading the way, the kid staff who are leading the way, that I can walk down the room or walk down the hallway at home and hear my little ones reading the Bible by themselves together. Yeah. Again, that's not me and my husband. We can model that in our home, but it is that they have this church to go to where it's modeled from various people, multi-generational.
Yes, I love
Let's
that.
go.
Yeah.
Come on, Julie.
Awesome.
Cheers.
I can't leave hanging.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
Nate,
I'm really passionate about this.
So good.
I haven't been in the church or worked in the church as long as John has, obviously, with his advanced
Just his age.
With his advanced age. But I've spent a significant portion of my life, from a percentage standpoint, in the church, and I feel like I've seen the good, the bad, the ugly, and I feel like I see it for what it is. And I have no, some people see it as this very holier than thou. Oh, it's perfect. And I would say I understand that there are broken, sinful people that God is trying to use to ultimately fulfill his mission on the planet, which is to reach people for him. And ultimately, when you realize that like the church isn't perfect, it's also led by people who are not perfect and who are figuring it out. But it's our only hope. It is the best hope that we have for society. It is the best hope that we have for culture. It is the best hope that we have. And when you see the transformation that happens from marriages being restored and addictions being broken and lives being literally healed and transformed and families and generations literally being saved, where else would we go? Where else would we? It's not going to be in politics. It's not going to be in the school. It's not going to be in sports teams. It's not going to be in book clubs. I mean, there is nowhere else. And so if we don't pour everything we have into the church as a place and try to make it what we believe that God has called it to be, then we're hopeless.
Yep.
You know, and you can sit there at home and try to create this thing for yourself. But honestly, this is what God has told us. Like, this is my hope for the world.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. Daniel, just to keep that going, I agree with everything you said. You're a preacher. Love it. I just love your heart, Nate, and your mind around it. And you are so passionate about the church. That's why you've dedicated your life to it. But there are still people that are like, yeah, that sounds good. But I still am kind of hoping this political party is going to be the change. And the church is really still, it's not for me. You know, What would you say to that person, Daniel, who's still like, and we believe that. Julie's experience, we've experienced that in the church, but some people haven't. And some people are still like, there's no place for that. What would you say to that person?
Yeah, I think what I want to try to hold in tension is empathy and clarity. So like, I think the empathy is, I think we all would say we have to be willing to admit the church has a history of not looking like the Jesus we worship. Like, it brings to mind this famous quote from Gandhi, who essentially was like, I would be a Christian if it was just for your Christ, but your Christians are so unlike your Christ. And I think like, yep, we got to own that.
Yeah.
And I do think it is important to have some distinction between the bride of Christ and Christ himself. So people being hurt by the church is real.
Yeah.
However, it is, at the same time, here's the clarity bit. I think this idea of like, I'm spiritual, but I don't like organized religion, it just always makes me think, so you prefer disorganized religion? Like, what does that mean? I don't know that I understand like where you're coming from on that. And they're like, spiritual, but I just do my own thing. I really think the more I've thought about that is a product of prideful Western individualism, hyper-individualism, and a rejection of the reality that we were built as communal creatures to be in community. And it's fascinating. You find communities pop up everywhere. It's like
CrossFit, book clubs. I mean, things to talk about. Yeah, right.
Everywhere.
Gyms, gyms, John.
More gym stuff.
More gym stuff. Like, people are just naturally forming communities, which I think is similar to this, like, we naturally go to God in crisis, like it's telling us something really true about who we are and how we were created.
Yeah.
And so I agree with Nate. Like, ultimately, there is no expression of covenant relationship with God we see in Scripture that does not involve community.
Yeah.
None.
Right. Yeah.
Well, that's what you guys have the benefit. I mean, you guys sit at an interesting seat in our church. You're at our offices, kind of strategically creating and designing things, and us at the campus level. Like, if you asked all the pastors at Eagle Brook that question, they could point to story after story after story after story of that being lived out, which is people who are living in this hyper individualistic age, who are feeling isolated, who are finding community and connection, and it's changing their life.
Yeah.
Because that's where God's able to meet them.
Yeah.
And I think that's where, for me, when I meet with people, especially when they first start coming to church, some of the things I like to talk to them about is like, one, you don't have to agree with everything you hear. And that is so freeing for people. So I think that is a misconception. They think, well, if I go to that church, that means I have to agree with every single thing about that church or every single piece of theology or every, it's like, I like to remind them, like, Jason's not the Pope. Like there's not this thing you have to sign before you come, and that you affirm everything he ever says from the pulpit or in his messages. And like, just to watch people be like, oh, and the second thing I tell them too is like, hey, Christians have disagreed about stuff for 2,000 years. Like, I mean, they disagreed about certain stuff about the resurrection right away. Like they just it's inherent in our belief is that we allow disagreement. And so I was like, so we didn't figure it all out either.
Yeah.
Like, we aren't the one church that figured out all of the questions Christians have asked for the past 2,000 years. Now,
Right.
we have ideas and thoughts about that, and so that is also one of those that helps people go, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And so I just try to I really encourage people, just come and experience.
Yeah.
Just see what it's like. And I do think sometimes that can help get their guard down a little bit to actually open themselves up to what the church can be in their life.
Yeah.
Versus all the preconceived notions of what it must be or should be, right?
Yeah.
But that sometimes just letting people know, right, that like you don't have to agree with everything here,
Totally.
right, is so important.
Yeah.
But
You guys all had really good nuggets and really good, wisdom around people who are wrestling with that question. So here's kind of the last question. We're going to think about the person, and we all know these people, so maybe in an interaction, conversation you've had, but someone who is deep in questioning faith. God, is it really a God? Maybe. Jesus, did he really die on the cross, resurrected from the grave? Maybe even they're just questioning church. They're just in a state of, I'm really 50-50 unsure here. What would you say to that person? Like, if you were speaking to them, advising them, talking to them, what would be your advice? What would be your wisdom? How would you approach that conversation? Because there are a lot of people who are in deep questioning around all things Christianity. And this, bring it back to the question, does Christianity make sense to me? What would you say to them? So maybe Julie, we'll start with you and we can go down the line.
Yeah, I don't know that I would start by saying something, but maybe just affirming, again, what we've been saying, but it's okay that you're unsure. It's okay that you have questions. And then I think even just asking, like, them to maybe articulate or share, like, what's at the root. Because oftentimes what we see on the surface is not the thing that is on the inside. And so maybe they're saying something to you, but that's not actually like where it's coming from. So maybe it's fear. Maybe they've been let down. Maybe they've gone through something. And so then you can actually start to enter into the space that's the actual barrier that they're having. And so I think, for me, it's more about just listening, entering in, affirming that it's okay to have questions, and then asking the next question that informs the root that we can then step toward, whether it's a conversation with someone else or a resource, or what if it's simply just saying, hey, let's grab coffee once a week for a period of time, and we can wrestle these questions and talk about it and share story with one another. And so for me, maybe that's just my own personal approach, but it's less about like this one golden answer, because truthfully, like, Jesus didn't move with, yes, he had the word of God, but he was personal, and he approached each person that he walked with, whether known or unknown, and he met them exactly where he was at and said something that was unique to them in his patient journey with them. So that's how I would approach someone like that.
that's great.
John, how about you?
Yeah, I think there's two things for me. One is there's like these practical things you can do. I think when you're wrestling through stuff, like there's certain books that are great to read. There's podcasts that are good to listen to. And I do think that can be an important part for a lot of people. I also think the second thing is going to church. It sounds funny to say. It's like, oh, of course Eagle Brook says go to church. but really to get to church, and because every pastor at Eagle Brook would love to have a conversation with you. And that's what you need, right? You're not going to find it in a YouTube hole of some disembodied pastor you've never met and never will see or never hear your story, because, like you said, Julie, it is so connected to your story. Like your faith, your faith journey, the things you're wrestling with, the doubts you have, are so connected to who you are that you need a guide. And every one of our campuses has pastors that would be incredible guides. Every one of our campuses has volunteers at Next Steps who would ask great questions to help you find what maybe is a next step to as you wrestle through things. Like everybody, like every campus has those people ready and willing to sort of be a guide for you. And it's a really lonely journey. And so you can't do it alone.
Yeah.
You just can't.
Yeah.
I do think you will always get stuck
Yeah.
doing it alone. And so at some point you do have to take that step of going, okay. And I really feel like I can promise you, like, if you come through the doors of an Eagle Brook campus and you connect with someone, they will experience what you experienced,
Yes.
which is welcome and encouragement, and finding someone that can kind of come alongside you as you wrestle through those questions.
Yeah, it's good. Daniel?
Yeah, I think what I would want to communicate is essentially the truth from Scripture that says, taste and see that the Lord is good. That there is this relational reality to God that so often we think the answer is to try and get the answers and then begin this journey of faith. When I actually, to call back to something you talked about, this like practicing way of being, like start coming to church, start reading your Bible to know God, start praying, and see what happens as you engage with God relationally if belief starts to form as you do those practices.
Yeah.
So I think that it was almost like a paradigm shift that I would try to invite someone into. If you find yourself in this on the fence and there's something I really want about faith, but I still have these questions, like start practicing following Jesus now and see what happens with those questions as you engage relationally.
Yeah. Nate?
Yeah, I love this group because we all come from so many different perspectives, and I'm the only one here who's not a pastor, but like I am a critic, a cynic, and I think what I would say is like, what's the other option? What is the thing for you? And I sit there and I over the last year watched Levi grow up and watch the miracle of childbirth and watching the way he's wired and all the systems and the beauty that goes into like a human becoming a human. And it's like you have to explain something with that. There has to be something there. There has to be a system that creates these systems of beauty. They just didn't come out of nothing, and it isn't for nothing. He exists for a purpose, and if they're like, what is that? And so that's what I would ask people is like, look through your life and what is the reason for all of this? What is the reason for relationships? What is the reason for pain? What is the reason for death? What is the reason for suffering? What is the reason that we're going through all of this human experience? And I don't think there's any more plausible thing than the Christian faith. I just don't. There is no like logical explanation for all of this that's more plausible than that. And so I would say then once you get to that point, then you just put it into faith, put it into practice, start showing up to church, seeing the transformations that are happening and going, what else is there? And so, yeah, I wouldn't come at it from like trying to explain all the answers. I would more just say like, well, what else? What else explains this? And I don't know what does.
That's really good.
Yep.
You guys, what a great conversation. Just your thoughts, your wisdom, just your heart that you bring to things. Thank you for this. We actually sent a team out onto the streets in the winter.
Come on.
All right.
To
In
ask
Minnesota.
people questions and questions of faith. And so we're actually going to take some time and watch some of these clips, and then we're just going to respond to them.
Do you believe in any kind of afterlife, heaven or hell, or anything else?
I don't particularly do.
Okay.
I'm kind of the opinion of, I'll find out when I get there.
Yeah, great.
Okay, heaven and hell. People do have those questions. Find out when I get there. What would you say to that?
Yes, you will.
Yes, you will. Yeah.
I really do like this question because one of my ways of thinking is always like, well, what if I'm wrong? Like, what's the risk if I'm wrong? And like, I would never be able to live life that way of like, if I'm wrong, I will spend an eternity in hell. If I'm wrong on this, or if I'm wrong and there isn't anything and this is just it, I lose nothing.
Yeah.
We're all in the same place.
But there is an element of truth to her. We're all going to find out when we get there.
We will.
But you're just saying, I'd rather put my certainty on this side of things before waiting until it's too late type of thing. Yeah.
I think, I mean, in conversations like that too, one of my favorite follow-ups is just like, do you think it matters now? Like, do you have to answer that now?
Yeah.
Like, and why would you? Like, why would that matter to you of how you live your life now?
Yeah.
Because people are, yes, they have these moments of thinking about the afterlife, but like, we're experts at not thinking about it, right? Like, humans are amazing at not thinking about the fact that we're all gonna die.
I know.
Like, we're all dying.
Yeah.
And yet for some reason we don't ever really live life in light of that. And so I think sometimes when that question's asked, or if people are like wrestling, I don't know, maybe it's like, well, they're starting to think about at least about death, mortality. And so I think sometimes that's a great next question is like, hey, regardless of that, like, do you think it matters? Like, if we just turn into dust, or there is a heaven or hell, like, do you think it matters for our life now?
Yeah.
And sometimes that just gets them percolating about their own mortality and what it means to have purpose and meaning. And that can sometimes be a doorway into deeper conversation.
Well, just like Daniel dropped a lot of quotes by famous people, I'd like to quote Tim McGraw, who says, live like you were dying.
Live like you were dying. Thanks, John.
Welcome.
Do you believe in heaven or an afterlife?
I'd say I believe in an afterlife. I'm not fully sold on heaven yet, but yeah.
I definitely believe in a place after death, but I'm just not very sure on what that is specifically.
So what's he referring to? What if you don't go to heaven or hell? What are people thinking happens?
I think what I'm just genuinely struck by in these clips is, specifically in these guys' answers, I do think almost all of human history has some ideas of an afterlife. So I do think that is another one of these like hardwired things that points to a truth about us. But man, I'm just gripped by the phrase that's coming to my mind is distractionism. That like we just live every day distracted by the bills I gotta pay and the apps on my phone and the drama in my relationship, and like, I don't know.
You're saying who has time to even think about what's next?
Yeah,
I don't have time.
yeah. Or like in our society, which is so unique in human history, like almost every other culture and society has had at least systems of belief on these things, spent time thinking about them, coming to try to understand them. And it just seems like our society's answer is meh. You know? And that's why I loved your answer of like, do you think it matters? Or like, I don't know. I think of Pascal's wager. The like, man, if I'm right about this, then that's really important. And if I'm wrong about this,
It doesn't matter.
right,
Yeah.
you know?
We're in the same place.
And I just think like, how can we not spend more time thinking about these things, paying attention to something like what happens when I die?
Yeah.
Do you believe in miracles?
No.
I don't believe in miracles in a faithful sense, but I believe in them in a reality that crazy things can happen for multitudes of reasons.
Thoughts? Julie, how about you?
It's probably not the right answer, but I feel sad. Like, God can do miracles. He does miracles in big and small ways. And I think for me, my mind, my heart goes to how, if it's not something that they're thinking about now, how do we as the church meet them in that space where they don't know and find an opportunity to enter in? Because I don't know. Yeah, there's just this piece of me that if they're not going to come into our doors because they're not curious or wondering, like, where is that space?
Yeah, I think of it, or is the question, how do we answer that question? Or is the question, how do we answer his response to the question? Or just respond to the experience?
Yeah, responding to his thoughts, yeah.
I'm going to respond to his thoughts.
Yeah.
I'm going to respond to his thoughts. I mean, in a conversation, if I was having with him follow up, I would just, I think about the fact that, like, there's one miracle, the resurrection of Jesus, that is like the miracle, right? And this might sound controversial. I don't think it really needs to be, but that is the miracle, right? That is that kind of belief, faith that we all have to come to. Just going, is Jesus who he says he is or not? And like, if he is, then a miracle happened. Like, he was dead and was raised from dead. Like, that's a miracle, and everything is built upon that, right? And I think sometimes I like to remind people, like, you actually don't have to affirm all the other miracles, you know, or even necessarily even believe miracles are happening all around you or something. Because I do think that is something that people get into. It's like they hear that from Christians, like, oh, there's miracles everywhere, and I got a parking spot, it was a miracle, and you know, my light bulb suddenly turned on, it was off the day before, it's a miracle. It's like, and people just go, oh my gosh, like, what in the world's going on? It just turns them off in their understanding of miracle, or what they feel like they need to affirm about miracles in order to be a person of faith. Whereas I like to remind people, like, that is the miracle. And you can wrestle with, do miracles still happen? Do they not? Did all this stuff in the Bible really happen, or did it not? Like that, you don't actually have to affirm all of that to take a step towards Jesus, and to affirm that he rose from the dead. So that's one thing I think about when I watch that, is like, that's okay. That's all right, man. Like, you actually don't have to, you know, see miracles maybe the way I see them. Or, and the second way I think of it is like, man, I experience miracles all the time. But that's probably because of the way I define miracles, which is anytime something happens that is just so contrary to human nature, I think it's a miracle. Like I am born selfish. Like I am born thinking of myself. So every time like I do something or experience something outside of myself, I'm like, that's a miracle. Like I thought about my wife first, or like I made the bed. It's a miracle. Just like there's all these little things every day. There are all these little imprints, I think, of the divine. And I think that's a miracle to me.
Yeah.
That like we see these just little moments of things that break through the darkness of human existence. Like to me, that's a miracle.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, and so I think sometimes we only think, especially those of us maybe outside the faith, we think of miracles as like, I haven't seen lame person walk today, so miracles don't happen. It's like, well, I haven't seen that either.
Yeah.
But man, I've seen a ton of ways that God has interacted with me today. And I've seen a ton of ways he's interacted with other people. Isn't that miraculous? You know, and so I think those are like maybe the two ways I would respond to something like that.
I think a lot of people can relate to what he said, though. I think most people would say there are unexplainable things that have happened.
Yep. Yeah.
Whether they call it miraculous or not, there's just I can't even believe I was going down the freeway and I almost got sideswiped, but somehow I avoided the person. You know, it's who they're attributing it to is the difference. I think. I think, and a lot of people probably resonate with what he says. Like, yeah, there are things that happen, and I don't really know.
Yeah,
why.
karma, circumstance.
And it's
whatever,
like, but it's pretty crazy. There's something at work. Something, you know. That was good.
Does Christianity make sense today?
Christianity in a subject, I feel, could make sense. Unfortunately, the majority of Christian opinions that you hear are heavily negative just because they're the ones that are most outspoken, which gives a negative light in general.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've talked about this some, but this is representing an opinion that we hear a lot. So thoughts on her response?
I love that she uses the word subject. You know, like Christianity as a subject makes sense. And I think, again, that it does bum me out, but I think that's like, well, what an opportunity.
Yeah.
Right. To maybe shift the conversation from it's actually not just a subject.
Yeah.
It's not just these, again, what we've talked about from the very beginning, all these beliefs I have to have, or all these truth claims, or all these behaviors I have to express, or all these ways I have to vote, or whatever the things are that we create as like the subject of Christianity. It's a relationship with Jesus. Like that is really what it is. And it's the freedom and the hope that comes from having a savior.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, wow, how can we help people? Like, how could I help her maybe see is like, it's not just a subject. It's actually something that can radically alter and change the way you live your life and who you are and how you interact with the world and your friendships and your community, all that stuff. Like, that's actually what it is. And to sort of help people maybe take a step towards that is exciting to me.
Yeah.
Right. And it's what we're passionate about, obviously, as a church. But that's what I think about. It's like, I think most people see Christianity as a subject. Like, oh, yeah, I know about Christianity.
Yeah.
I know about this story, this Bible story I heard from grandma or whatever it is. And it's like, oh, man, there's so much more.
Yeah.
Like, oh.
Yeah, I do actually have a thought for the last guy that I just can't stop thinking about. And that this idea of discomfort with miracles really being so many people have been convinced that all there is the physical material world.
Yep.
But a phrase I've actually heard people using a lot more that I think is fascinating is even in that worldview, you would basically have to say, give me one miracle and then no more. So like the universe coming into existence, like that's a miracle. So I believe in that one, but then everything else is just taking care of itself, and the world is just mechanistic, and it's all, just atoms and molecules and matter, and I just think that's so fascinating. I think we're so uncomfortable with mystery in our society. But even something like quantum physics, to be nerdy again, like the more we know about that, the more it's like, I don't understand what's going on here. And this is a mystery. And mystery does not mean it's irrational. It just means it's beyond rational. Like, it doesn't mean we can't know anything. We can know something. We just have to admit there's some things beyond our ability to grasp.
Well, it's the difference between there's things we don't know yet, and there's things we just can't know. And like that's, I think, sort of the crisis for people, right? Is they get that wrong, like, or they get it messed up, And it's like, and there's certain things we don't know, but man, there's just also some things we just can't know, just because the limits, because we have infinite experience, and we're finite people, right? And so, but I love that. That's really interesting.
One of the things is what we do know is constantly changing. I think we're so often as humans prone to like look at our current generation or whatever as like it's the fullness, where it's like when you look to human history, just recorded human history, how often things have changed in beliefs and structures that like for thousands of years people were convinced the sun was this. People for thousands of years were convinced this was, and now it's like we look back and we're like, can you believe they thought that? What are they going to think 100 years from now about what we're thinking today? What are they going to think about 400 years from now that we're thinking about today? And so it's like we can't continue to just look at what we currently believe as like the fullness, and just realize that it's like we're probably still only scratching the surface. And when you look at it that way, it's like, how could that disprove? It just means we don't know it yet, you know?
Yeah, I think even in this lady's answer of like, you know, as a subject, I think this, but then the primary voices I hear are these loud and negative ones. Some of the guys' answers about like, the first one, I guess I'll find out when I get there, or I believe in afterlife. I don't know what I believe. I think it's just like, if I could sit down with each one of these people, I don't know that I would try to answer all their questions, but I would try to inspire and motivate them to diligently pursue answers to their questions.
Yes.
Right.
And like, how distracted we are as a society. I just can't get over it.
Yeah.
Like we gotta be hungry for truth.
Yep.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, that's why we're doing the series. Does Christianity make sense? We want to ask those questions. We want people to ask that question. That's why we phrased it as a question.
Yeah.
Does Christianity still make sense? We want people to ask that question and pursue answers, and however God leads them. So thanks again for joining us, you guys. You guys are brilliant.